huge fan or whatever, and so, but for a huge fan, I'm sure that would have been great to be able to 4 seats.
Not very many people
Thanks, I was getting ready to
didn't see you
compliment
come back
yours.
this
I like that
direction.
meeting, though.
Did you find it, the
Don't
power
go
plant?
too well, though.
I did.
I know, I just got
Too.
these were the children's. I know,
They're
and
cute.
gloves and socks, I
Yeah.
got, and the children's also.
Looks cheaper.
Let's see if this is.
Yeah.
I may have brought the wrong one, hang on.
Let's
see.
Well, you wouldn't want to be
Ron?
because you're so little, it'd be
There
kind
you
of
go.
funny. Yeah, over here.
Let's see.
Passed over for height.
There it is, okay. I grabbed the wrong one, yeah.
Did the,
Let's see.
and we're replacing the existing one
Yeah.
Yeah.
that was done that already.
You're looking for jobs other places. What you
No, I'm moving to Kansas this week.
do? Oh, you are.
So it's not
Are you
too
leaving?
Tuesday, and then I'll be back down next weekend to try to get everything out of the storage. and
Oh,
move
how
there.
come you decided to move?
Because that's, well,
It's kinda
Leanne kind of needs me up there. I can do a lot more up there. She's not
Have you
been
already
working
passed
hard.
out?
I can do a
She's out
lot
there somewhere.
Have
to
you already passed out
help
the
fix up her
outline
house,
for
take
the-
Yeah,
care of
yeah.
the boys.
You have an extra
All
one.
right, let's see.
Her
Let's see how it
health-
looks,
Her
Ron.
health is not very good. I mean,
And
I
it's-
kind of found that
her
out while I was
issues
up
I would say
there.
that's it.
That's
'cause,
all wearing on.
yeah,
So,
that's
you
my
know,
update.
when
Alright.
the Lord
Got
gives
all
you
that
two
button on the
options,
other one.
but then
There
one
you go.
falls
Now,
through,
I'll take
it
you
kind
back
of
to
makes
the
a clear
beginning.
path for
Yeah,
where
that'll work.
you need to go. So, and like I said, as I was up there, it became
Sure,
pretty
but
clear
you
that
get me on the lead. You see it?
it might be better to be up there. That's not where I want to be, but it's where I need to be.
There we go, man.
So it came down to a need or a want.
Oh, it went to,
She's in need. He's in
Hey, I got
Now, how old
it.
is she?
Yeah.
67.
68 this year.
Yes.
You know,
So she's getting up there in age
Skill
on
saw.
top of.
On top of her difficulties, yeah, and the boys, you
Well,
know,
it-
there's
it's
something
her-
I
happens
would
to
be
her.
exhausted.
When I was trying to cut,
Yeah,
I was about
her
4 inches away
energy
from the blade,
is really
but it
down.
bound up and just
So,
brought it in itself.
You know, it would help.
66.
we still got it.
She'll be
Yeah.
68 this year.
Yeah.
I can't say nothing, I'm just a man.
Do you have one of those? Do you have
He still got it, so you're doing good.
Yeah. Hey, John, hit the full screen, just make sure that this is what.
You're not
Haven't
past
had-
that age.
Yes.
No, you're not.
Oh,
You had that one
mid-70s.
fenced out last
No.
week.
Okay, yep,
Oh, I
got
didn't
it.
You
Yeah.
haven't had heart attacks.
streaming and all that? No?
Yeah.
It is,
Yeah.
it is streaming, it's just not recording yet.
Yeah, and see, she had a heart attack and did not go to
Yeah,
sleep.
and
That are,
After she had that,
that
she
are
just
like kids.
walked around until it went away. She didn't want to go to the
But-
doctor again, so she's not,
We are so
she's having
fortunate.
some not just
You have to do the audio.
physical, but a
So
little
I'm
bit
doing the green light.
You
mental.
gotta do the
I wanna sit
audio.
on
You
that.
can't do
Yeah.
the audio from here.
I really did.
Audio. Well, he
And the
said
loss
the
of
other
my
day,
father.
even everything done.
With the emotions, and it's become very, very difficult. And I probably can't affect the change in that, but maybe it will help her, and maybe it's
Oh,
still
we don't
help
want the paper
her.
files. Get down to Dallas for my granddaughter's graduation.
She's getting ready to do a renovation.
We're going to
Both
Branson.
bathrooms and all
Okay.
the
We're leaving Monday and
fixed
we'll come
in
back
the
Saturday.
house.
The hell, good.
That should help
It's like when
with
Silver City
just
is there.
changing.
Yeah, that's the plan as far as if the weather is cooperative.
Okay, I'll do the rain dance.
Just, it's
The other day, he said,
It's rain forecasting.
not
You
what I
know,
want.
timing has a lot to do with the success of a rain
Wasn't
dance.
here, but he said, I wouldn't necessarily see it on there.
I don't know if you have to go.
You like my Western philosophy?
It's not where I want to go this time, it's just,
The transition.
well, it costs a lot of money to move.
Anybody
with all
else need
my
a copy
food.
of our outline, the future of Israel?
That's what our study's gonna be beginning here this morning. Walking on a bunch of stuff here. Well, and as everybody in the class knows, we've been studying so-called teachings concerning the end times, and in particular, things regarding the premillennial doctrine that's widespread in the religious world in our day and age, and what is believed about the future of Israel is one of the major false premises of premillennialism. And that's what we're going to be looking at here starting this morning and probably go into next week also. A lot of you are probably aware that our government has had a pro-Israel foreign policy for many, many years. And this is a key reason why the Arab nations have such a hatred of American Americans. How many people realize that or not, but that is certainly the case. And as far as I'm concerned, as an ally, I don't see any problem with America being involved in favoritism, so to speak, to Israel, like we show favor to other allies and having this pro-Israel policy. But when you look behind the scenes, a primary reason for this policy is due to the influence of dispensational premillennialists in governmental offices. And the many dispensational preachers who held in high regard. Billy Graham, whenever he was alive, had access to political leaders, and he was certainly a proponent of the premillennial doctrine, and part of it is this pro-Israel policy that has been enacted in government areas for years. Franklin Graham now would be doing the same type of thing. Pat Robertson, 700 Club, another one that is predominant not only in the religious world, talking about these things, but also has political influence on these things. Jerry Falwell, late Jerry Falwell, also make mention of him and his stance whenever he was alive that related to this pro-Israel policy. The future of Israel as God's chosen people, along with the regathering of Israel's promised land, her exaltation over all the nations, and the wholesale conversion of Jews is just a major part of the premillennial theory. It's behind all these other things that we've been looking at in our studies of the premillennial doctrine. So we're going to be contrasting this theory that the premillennialists have about Israel, present state and future state, contrast that with what God says about the current state and the future of Israel. That's what our subject matter is going to be about. Gene, what's your comment?
With the current administration, none of that is of any
But that's true, and that's a good point. The current administration, they apparently don't have a pro-Israel policy on things right now. And some of that may be okay, except again, they are an ally in the Middle East, and virtually the only credible ally, if you want to call them that, in the Middle East right now on things. And if we didn't have them as an ally, I would contend things would be much, much worse than what they already are. It's just personal opinion, and that's all politics, I understand that on things. What we're mainly interested in our study, of course, is what the premillennialists do with the scriptures, trying to say we have to have this pro-Israel policy. That'll be the main focus that we have. But no, you're right, current administration very clearly indicates that they don't have, actually I think even have animosity toward Israel in one way or another, as an ally or whatever the reason.
I think, my personal opinion, I think part of that is because our president's bias toward Muslims.
Well, I believe that's the case, and you look at his history and how he was raised and things of that nature. It's all a matter of political things that you see out there in the news on things.
The Democrats
he,
never
his parents and others abused by him. This pro-Israel policy and that type of thing on it. All Muslims being abused by it. Part of the perspective. Cal, you had a question?
I was just gonna say the Democrats have never had a dispensation
Yeah.
or
Yeah, that's right.
predisposition towards Israel. It has been the Republicans that always had that. And FDR was not a great assistant. In fact, he did not help them until Harry Truman did help them some. But Democrats have never, except John F. Kennedy, had a predisposition for them.
Well, we'll look at some of this, and again, you know, kind of the political part of things, but again, we realize our focus is not necessarily on that, but we have to talk about it because that's what premillennialists, that's the root of some of these things here, and how it impacts the political world because of what they think is going to happen once Israel fulfills what they think are some unfulfilled biblical prophecies about the future of Israel. Let's start with a word of prayer. Cal, you want a word of prayer here this morning?
Our most gracious Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for the night of rest, for this another lovely day in which we can come before you, worship you, and render unto you all honor and praise and glory. To study your word, that we may be more equipped to be profitable servants to you. We ask you with our teacher today as he presents these things to us. Let's examine them in the light of the Bible and make application in our lives with us. We ask to be with those that aren't here with us because of illness and relief, and to be of service to them. And if they're suffering from spiritual illness, let us also be of assistance in restoring them back to favor with you. We ask you to continue to be with us and bless us and use us in your kingdom. Be with those that are not as fortunate as we are. And in that great day when you gather all of yours together, may we all be gathered with God from all sides. In Jesus' name.
We're going to begin what I've been doing when we're looking at some of these premillennial theories by defining what they mean by it, explaining what they claim regarding these kind of doctrines. So we're going to look at the premillennial doctrine regarding Israel. And basically, dispensational premillennialism holds the Jews as God's chosen people forever. Emphasis on the word forever. And states that Israel must return to the land of Palestine, the land of Canaan, and become a great nation ruling the world. Hal Lindsey, some of you probably are familiar with his book, mentioned before, sold millions of copies around the world in his book, The Late Great Planet Earth. And this went around the religious world in the 70s and the 80s. On page 43 of this book, he states the one event which many Bible students in the past overlooked was this paramount prophetic sign. Israel had to be a nation again in the land of its forefathers. And in the book, he saw Israel's being declared a state in 1948 as that prophetic sign, leading up to the second coming of Christ. So they view the Jews as God's chosen people forever, and they believe that Israel must return, national Israel must return to the land of Palestine, and they thought that Israel's statehood in 1948 was that prophetic sign of the beginning of what would be setting up the second coming of Christ and Jesus establishing his kingdom and things of this nature. Jared.
In order for, of course, we talked about before about Christ to come back, and in their view, he's going to reign in Israel. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 1, it talks about the genealogy, and Josiah begat Jeconiah. Well, one of the things that Jeremiah tells us in Jeremiah 22, verse 28 through 30, that
no descendant of Jeconiah is going to be sitting on the throne.
Right.
The literal
Right, exactly.
Throne, that's right.
Referred to as Coniah there, but anyways,
That's
of course, right.
And that's one of the defects of the doctrine of premillennialism, whenever they started talking about Jesus coming back and reigning literally, physically, on the throne of David in Jerusalem. Jesus is a descendant of Jeconiah.
Right, you can't.
And therefore couldn't, according to the biblical terminology, actually reign literally, physically, as king in Palestine.
I don't think we covered that. If we did, I apologize.
Right. And it's just one of those, I've presented that to those that believe premillennial doctrine, and they just don't relate. It just doesn't compute to them on thing. But it's a valid argument, definitely a valid argument. There's other ways, I think, to try to show it, but we've talked about the fact that premillennial doctrine is so embedded in people's thinking. It's one of those things that's very difficult for people to leave out of their religious thinking, and it's just taught so much too in all aspects of the religious world. Another quotation, I said I mentioned Jerry Falwell, Jerry Falwell. Time magazine, back in 1979, October 1 issue, 1979, reported Jerry Falwell as describing himself as an ardent Zionist. And we'll talk about Zionism here in just a moment. But he described himself as an ardent Zionist and as one who, and quoting the magazine, preaches that one reason God favors America is that America has blessed the Jews, his chosen people. Now, of course, this goes back to Old Testament Bible passages where God had stated from time to time that any nation that blesses you, my people, I'll bless them. And so that's a part of this doctrine. And he believed and stated that in the magazine, that this is the reason why God was favoring America back at that time, because of our relationship with Israel. Some of you may recall Falwell's meeting in Washington, D.C. with Israel's Prime Minister Menachem Begin, fall of 1981. And there's some of the things he talked about. America's pro-Israel foreign policy, especially back in the 70s and the 80s, premillennialists contended that views of Bible prophecies regarding Israel and Jesus' return were set to be fulfilled. A generation, most of them will admit, and a lot of them don't nowadays because it didn't come to pass, but most of them used to admit that a generation about 40 years' time. It's just a known thing, generation about 40 years' time, because people live from 70, 80 years of age, and so you've got another generation that comes around every 40 years. Well, 1948 is when Israel was officially declared a state. So these premillennialists in the 70s and the 80s were really hot on this topic. Within 40 generations, this one period of 40 years, they were going to see the fulfillment of these biblical prophecies regarding Israel and the second coming of Christ. And that's why that one fellow mentioned last week wrote his book that he sent out, booklet sent out all his churches, 88 Reasons Why the Rapture Could Occur in 1988. That was exactly 40 years after Israel being declared a state in 1948. And he gave these 88 reasons why that he thought it was going to take place. Well, it didn't take place. So then a lot of them now say, well, generation not necessarily mean 40 years of time, or it is the generation when you begin seeing these signs. Well, they thought they saw those signs, you see, in 1948, and especially teaching about these things. Questions or comments on just what we're saying here, defining their doctrine. Zionism. Let's look specifically at what Zionism is. This is from Britannica Encyclopedia. Zionism is a Jewish national movement with the goal of creating a Jewish national state in Palestine, the ancient homeland of the Jews. Goes on to state in the article that Zionism originated in Eastern and Central Europe in the latter part of the 19th century. It is in many ways a continuation of the deep-felt nationalist attachment of the Jews and of the Jewish religion to Palestine, the land promised by God to the Jews. Now note this statement, Encyclopedia Britannica states that the interest in a return of the Jews to Palestine was kept alive in the first part of the 19th century, more by Christian premillennialists, especially in Great Britain, than by Jews themselves. Now, there's an important aspect of this whenever you study this. Jews didn't want to go back to Palestine. It was premillennialists that were Zionists that were trying to get them to go back to Palestine because they thought that that would fulfill biblical prophecies leading up to the land of, leading up to the second return of Christ. This is what's been going on since mid 1800s to early 1900s, especially, and on into even our century. The movement of Zionism is trying to get all the Jews to go back and establish this national Israel in Palestine. But the Jews in America didn't want to go back. Who wants to go back to war-torn Israel? They've been fighting for centuries over there. And it's like a third world country compared to America. Same thing in Britain. The Jews in Britain, they didn't want to go back. But this was the teaching of premillennialism, and this was the teaching that kept this movement alive. Now, Britannica goes on to say some political writers thought a Jewish state in the Holy Land as a means of assuring the overland route to India. See, they're just looking at it from a political perspective, and again, pro-Israel policy, because they're our ally. But then Britannica goes on to say others were inspired by religious or mystic ideas, anxious to fulfill prophecies and bring about the end of the world. So Encyclopedia Britannica, they've got to peg exactly what Zionism is all about, trying to get national Israel established in the land of Palestine to set up the return of Jesus Christ. And that is what is a part of this political pro-Israel policy. Cal, do you have a question or comment?
Well, just that, you're right. The reading I've done says the British led that, but there was some interest in America and other places too, in getting Jews to go, but they did seem to be interested, even though Jews have always been persecuted.
Yeah.
But after the turn of the century, got into the 1900s there, because of the increasing persecution they were getting in Eastern Europe, that's when you started seeing the Jews actually doing it. So, and they were trying to get to a place where, and until the end of the Second World War, the Jews pretty much lived at peace with their Palestinian neighbors there. But once they wanted to become a state, that changed everything.
Changed everything. That's right.
And it was, and Britain changed their policies too.
That's right.
They wanted that estate for a while, but then by the time they got around to finally trying to do it, they were actually getting no support at all from the British.
That's right. So, some more quotations here regarding John.
Looked to me like all the British wanted to do was get the Jews out of Britain.
I'm sorry?
Looks to me like all the British wanted to do was
Well,
get the Jews out of Britain.
There's probably some truth to that.
They wanted to do it a peaceful way instead of doing it the way Germany done it.
And, you know, there's been prejudice for Jewish people in our nation, especially in 1800s, 1700s, that type of thing, too. And so part of that would be involved in it, I'm sure, too. Involved in it also. Wikipedia, a lot of you are familiar with it. Wikipedia, Encyclopedia, online. Some more things about Zionism. They say Zionism is a belief the return of the Jews to the Holy Land and the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948 is in accordance with biblical prophecy. Zionists of the 1840s passed this notion on to Jewish circles, but Jewish nationalism in the 19th century was widely regarded by British Jews with hostility. Again, they got it pegged. That's exactly what has been going on. Now, there's some Jews that buy into Zionism and promote it. Some of the Jewish people do on things, and a lot of them have moved out under this aspect of things. A lot of them, I think more millions of them haven't bought into it than the ones that have, is what I'm saying. And in fact, most of them are hostile toward this idea of trying to settle the Jewish people back in the land of Palestine. They just don't want any part of it. Further, Wikipedia says Zionists believe that the gathering of the Jews in Israel is a prerequisite for the second coming of Jesus. The idea that Christians should actively support a Jewish return to the land of Israel as a means of fulfilling a biblical prophecy has been common in Protestant circles since the Reformation. So the late 1700s on into the 1800s, the Reformation period, this has been a common teaching those that buy into the amillennial doctrine, the premillennial thinking. Yes.
The Jews returning to Israel was a requirement for Christ to come again. No matter whether we support it or not, God's going to have to make it happen.
That's it.
So,
Yeah.
you know, that's what they believe. Well, why are they pushing it so hard? It's going to happen.
It's
That's
going to
what
help God out, you know, by helping to fulfill these prophecies.
It neither help to create the world.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's right. Good point. Good point. But again, as I said, again, the future of Israel is God's chosen, supposedly forever chosen people, along with the regathering of Israel, the promised land, exaltation over all the other nations, and also a part of this is what they believe the wholesale conversion of the Jews is just a major part of the premillennial theory. And that's what we're going to be looking at, what the Bible says about the current state of Israel and what would be the future state of Israel.
I think them people need to learn to read the whole statement. See, God said, "You'll be my chosen people forever if they forget what to read what after the
Yeah,
end."
and you're way ahead of us, but that's exactly right. One of the things. See, premillennialists do not see the promise that God made of Israel being his people forever and having the land. They don't see that as a conditional promise. They view it as I've got a quotation here. They view it as an unconditional promise and a part of an everlasting covenant. We're going to show what the scriptures show, state just like you're saying. God promised this if they would continue to obey. And that's what premillennialists do not buy into. In fact, they're very specific about this. It's an unconditional promise. Apostasy on Israel's part would not nullify this promise that God made with them. So it's a key part of their misunderstanding and not acknowledging what the scriptures actually teach on the matter. Did I see another hand up?
I was saying today, I mean, that's the fault of the religious world today is they take one part, like John's saying, in the Bible, and they apply it. Okay, I believe, but yet I don't obey. And it's the same thing that happens today.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, definitely so. Just like
Most
Jesus
of them people
had
think
said to
they
the Sadducees who
Most of
didn't
them
believe in
people say,
resurrection,
teaching this
you're
too.
Yes.
mistaken. You don't know the scriptures and you don't know the power of God. And the premillennial doctrine falls right in that category too. People are mistaken about it because they don't know what the scriptures have to teach, and they really question the power of God, such as God wasn't able to put his son up as king the first time, didn't have the power to do it. And that's a problem with virtually all false doctrines that are out there.
Well, it's like Paul says, I think it's Romans 10:2 that says they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. One of the two things. Well, let's look at this. Is national Israel the chosen people of God forever? See, that's what premillennialists are contending. National Israel as a nation as a whole, they believe are the chosen people of God forever. Here's a quotation from John F. Walford. He's past president of Dallas Theological Seminary, which has been teaching premillennial doctrine for ages. He has a book out, had a book years ago, entitled The Millennial Kingdom. And on page 18, he says the Abrahamic covenant required that Israel continue as a nation forever in order to fulfill the everlasting covenant and in order to have the land as an everlasting possession. So that's their statement, is that this covenant requires Israel continue as a nation, and Israel has to have the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession. Of course, they would point to, unfortunately, I have Genesis 18, 7 through 8, and up there it's Genesis 17. So turn to Genesis 17, and we'll read verse 1 through verse 8 of Genesis 17. This is where they get the beginning aspects of this doctrine that Israel is to remain national, is to remain a nation forever. Let's see. Dear, you want to start us off this morning? Genesis 17, 1 through 8.
Now when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you will be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful, and I will make nations of you, and kings will come forth from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout their generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. I will give to you and to your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God.
So this is a passage that Walford cites, that Prima Lewis would cite, that contends that this Abrahamic covenant, this covenant God made with Abraham at this time, requires Israel continue as a nation forever, and a part of this is that Israel would have the land of Canaan as an everlasting possession. They say God promised Abraham that his seed would possess all the land from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates, and that such possession would be everlasting. Genesis chapter 15 and verse 18 defines this territory that was promised. Minnie, you want to read it for us?
On that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abram and said, To your descendants I give this land from the Arabia of Egypt to the great river, the Euphrates.
You can look on the map, and you haven't already, and see the outline, the borders of this land then that was promised. God was very specific about it. And Prima let us say that no conditions were attached to this covenant mentioned earlier. So even apostasy on Israel's part does not nullify it. Therefore they conclude that Israel is continued as a nation forever. And they say it's obvious the Jews have not occupied the specified lands since Old Testament days, and therefore premillennialists believe it is necessary for them to do so in the future. You can look over there today and see the borders, and the borders don't go from Egypt clear up to the Euphrates. They've got a whole lot smaller territory, and they're always maybe gaining a little bit, but losing territory to the Arab nations on things.
They don't even have all of Jerusalem. They only have a piece of Jerusalem.
Yeah, that's right.
And the Temple Mount, the Temple Mount isn't theirs.
And what's the Arabs' contention? They contend the land belongs to them. And biblically, I can't argue with that, because God said they maintain possession of it as long as they're obedient, and they haven't been obedient, so the land goes to somebody else. Now, a particular opinion is that God's going to continue to afflict Israel as judgment against those unbelieving Jews. It's always going to be war-torn from here to the end of time because of the rejection of Jesus Christ as the Messiah.
Even if they
Questions or
drive,
comments at this point? Yes.
even if they drive all the Jews out of there, it's still going to be war torn, because
it.
that's the nature of the Muslim people.
Yeah. Well, yes, Gene, you have a question or comment?
The statement that the apostles, the question they asked at the time of Christ's death, they said, wilt thou now restore the nation to Israel?
Yeah.
They didn't have it then.
Yeah, that's right.
So possession being 9 points of the law, they did not think he wanted it then.
That's right.
And he said, will you now restore it? And his answer ultimately was, no, I'm not.
Yeah, that's right. They misunderstood what was going to be involved in it. Later on they knew and revealed that there's going to be a spiritual Israel, which is the church now, as opposed to national Israel. Paul, and we'll get to that in our studies in Romans chapter 10 and 11, talks about God's plan for Israelites. Individual Jews can be saved, and that's God's plan. But national Israel has no part in salvation, wholesale salvation of the Jews, like premillennial doctrine teaches. Did you have a question?
Well, I was just gonna say, these guys you're quoting these from these books, if they're smart enough to write books, how come they ain't smart enough to understand this one? Because it
Just
says
one of those-
in here that the nation of Israel were disbanded.
I understand, it's just one of those things that Satan does well with lies. And
Goes
deceive much of
logically,
this
yeah.
world in this particular doctrine. And as I made mention too, when I began a study of premillennialism, to me what has made this so easy for people to buy into is that Schofield Reference Bible. And these people have been reading it for years, and they'll go this passage like Genesis chapter 17, they have some notes about how that this is an everlasting covenant, and send you references down here to other places, and say that it hadn't been fulfilled yet, all these notes of that type of thing. And Satan's done his part very well in deceiving people in this particular doctrine, like he has others for that matter also. But anyway, that's part of it. That, again, they contend that national Israel is the chosen people of God forever, and that they were promised to have the land forever. Since they don't have it right now, then it's obvious it has to be fulfilled in the future. Well, let's look at this. The scriptures affirm that Israel has occupied all the land God promised Abraham. And put that in there because another thing too, some of them contend that they never did have all the land. Never did get all of it. And therefore then the promise definitely has to be future. We're going to look at some passages show that they did indeed receive all the land of promise. Look at Acts in chapter 7. And you remember what's going on here. Here's Stephen. He's defending what he believes before these antagonistic Jews that have taken him in custody. And he just gives kind of a brief history of God's dealings with Old Testament Israel, bringing them down to the time of Christ himself. But let's read, let's see, I think if you would, Acts 7, 1 through 5.
Then the high priest said, are these things so? And he said, brethren and fathers, listen. The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran. And he said to him, get out of your country and from your relatives and come to a land I will show you. Then he came out of the land of Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran. And from there, when his father was dead, he moved him to this land in which you now dwell. And God gave him no inheritance in it, not even enough to set his foot on. But even when Abraham had no child, he promised to give it to him for a possession, and to his descendants after him.
Well, Stephen affirms that God made this promise. Now, see, here's a problem with premillennial doctrine. They say God hadn't fulfilled his promise. That questions the power of God. God said, I'm going to give you and your descendants this land. And Stephen affirms that that was God's promise. And, we're contending that they misunderstand the scriptures that we're going to show here in a moment that shows they did receive it, and also they also underestimate the power of God who made the promise to begin with. Down in verse 17, Stephen said, when the time of the promise drew near, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. The time of the promise of them receiving the promised land, it grew near. And it was that time whenever the people grew and multiplied in Egypt. You go down to verse 36 and you see that Moses brought them out of the land of Egypt. But that's when he stops about the history of Israel and goes on to a prophet like unto Moses to be raised up. And Moses is the one who talked about that, and now he talks about Jesus, the Christ, being fulfillment of that prophecy of Moses, that one like him be raised up, giving the law. While Abraham, we know, didn't receive the land himself, his descendants grew and multiplied in Egypt, as affirmed here, just before the promise drew near for fulfillment, is what we gain from what Stephen says here. 40 years after Moses led Abraham's descendants out of Egypt, Joshua leads them into Canaan. We have that record in Joshua chapter 1 and verse 1 through 6. I lost control here somehow or another. Now we got it back. Let's see, John, you want to read? Are you there perchance? I didn't have it on the screen yet. Joshua chapter 1 through 6.
Now after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, it came to pass that the Lord spake unto Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' minister, saying, Moses my servant is dead. Now therefore rise, go over this Jordan, thou and all this people, unto the land which I do give to them, even to the children of Israel. Every place that the sole of your foot shall tread upon, that have I given unto you, as I said unto Moses, from the wilderness and this Lebanon, even unto the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, unto the great sea toward the going down of the sun, shall be your coast. To where? How far? 6? There shall not any man be able to stand before thee all the days of thy life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. I will not fail thee, nor forsake thee. Be thou strong and of good courage, for unto the people shalt thou divide for an inheritance the land which I swear unto their fathers to give them.
Notice the terminology here is very specific about the borders of the land, the territory that God promises to give them, and that's key. God promises Joshua that I am going to give you this land. Verse 6, be strong, good courage, for this people, for to this people you shall divide as inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. I was with Moses and leading them out of Egypt and bringing them up to the land of promise. I'll be with you, and nobody's going to be able to stand in your way of inheriting this land that I promised to the fathers. Questions the very power of God in accomplishing what he said he would promise to give to Israel. Yes, Ken.
Verse 7 says, only be strong and very courageous, to be careful to do all according to the law which Moses my servant commanded you. Do not turn from it right or left, so that you may have success wherever you go.
There's a condition
So there's
already.
a condition.
Yeah, that's right. And that's our next point that we'll labor on too. Very clearly a condition. Right there it states that, and there's other passages that state the same thing also. And we're gonna notice in our studies beginning next week that Israel did indeed possess all the land that God had promised to them. And they're very specific. Joshua, before he died, he affirmed that this was the case. But then we'll also point out, as Cal just made mention and that Jared mentioned earlier, all this was based upon the condition of their continued obedience to God, of them, first of all, gaining the land, and they did because they obeyed God, but also secondly, maintain possession of the land, and that's what they failed to do. They failed to remain faithful and true to God. And so then they violated the covenant that God made with his people, and the land was taken away from them. Yes, Ken.
Well, the three promises that God gave Abraham, the land promise was going to be a conditional promise based on faithfulness, okay? But the promise to make a great nation, I don't see any conditions on that, and I don't see any conditions on the fact that out of his seed would come the Savior, okay, the Messiah. So, but the land, keeping the land, that was conditional.
That was conditional, and that's a good point too. The great nation, first of all, fulfilled by the Jewish physical, literal nation, but the great nation that he was promising went into the Israel God would have, including Christians on things as fulfilled to a very clear lot of things. Well, I appreciate your comments, your questions here today. We'll begin, Lord willing, next week